Welcome to the New Books Network.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of New Books in History, a podcast on the New Books Network. I'm your host, Jana Byers, and I'm here today with the eminent medievalist Michael D. Bailey, professor of history at Iowa State University in Ames, Iowa, to talk about his 2021 release, Origin of the Witches' Sabbath. The book contains nimble and enjoyable translations of 5 medieval treatises, as well as 2 witchcraft trials, and a critical introduction. So I'm very excited. Hi, Mike.
Hi, thank you for having me here.
Thank you so much for joining me. How are you?
I am doing well. I'm doing as well as, as well as we all are in this day and age.
How is Ames today? Let me guess, sub-zero?
Not sub-zero, sub-freezing. Sub-freezing snow on the ground, usual Iowa.
Iowa in the winter. It's not for the faint of heart.
No. It makes us a hardy breed of folk.
Indeed. Something like that. It definitely it does something. So you're not teaching yet, right? Your semester's not quite back?
That's right. We start actually a week from today. We start next Monday.
Are you face to face?
I am face to face. We're doing I don't know what the percentages are. Basically, if you want to teach online, you can. At least so I've been told. But the university encourages us all to consider teaching face-to-face. So I taught face-to-face last semester actually as well in the fall, and it went fine. The students were all masked up, and we stayed at a distance. And frankly, all the statistics show that the spread does not occur in classroom settings or on campus. It occurs everywhere around campus,
Sure.
on campus.
Right. Well, I mean, we know what college students do when they're not in our classrooms, and
I have no knowledge of that.
Well, sure, because you remember college, right? Vaguely,
I
distantly.
I was a history nerd. I am not a standard sample here.
I was never cool. Yeah, but it's not our classrooms that are going to kill them. All right. Well, it'll be another adventure anyway this whole year. My goodness. All right. So let's dive into this. I'd like to start by placing the current work in the long arc of your career. Now, this first bit of your academic life has been devastatingly, intimidatingly productive. You have, I say it's a fellow historian, you've been at this for a bit over 20 years, and you've published, am I counting correctly, 7 books of varying sorts?
I don't really know.
Are you
That's about the most egotistical way I can answer that. I don't.
Yeah.
I lost track.
Yeah, I just bit back some unpleasant language. All right. Yeah, of varying sorts, 7. So let's start. Let's start here, since you seem to have forgotten because you've written so many things. But I just want to hit a couple highlights. We'll start with Battling Demons, which is 2003. And if I'm not mistaken, that grew out of your dissertation?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. And that places witchcraft in the medieval kind of the context of medieval reforming the medieval reforming church. And then you take this little turn and go into superstition, which comes to fruition in 2013 with Fearful Spirits, Reasoned Follies, the boundaries of superstition in late medieval Europe. But then you pretty much remain the magic guy. Like if I look at the dizzying array of articles, I can't count that high. Also, an historian. How many articles you've published? You're the magic guy. And the origin of the witches' Sabbath, sits pretty fairly in that, right? So this makes sense. Indeed, the volume contains Johannes Nieder's Anthill, which is a work that plays a fairly prominent role in battling demons. So I see a clear progression, but it's a bit of departure for you. You've got translation, and the format has limited your ability somewhat to situate the works as well as you can with your monographs. So I'm interested in why you decided to do this project. Like, how did you come to it? Where did what was the decision making process?
Sure, yeah. Well, in terms of situating this within the overall arc of my career, quite literally, this goes back to the very beginning. So, as you mentioned, my first book, Battling Demons, was really focused, and my dissertation had been focused on Johannes Nieder, this early 15th century, early 1400s German Dominican theologian and really first and foremost church reformer before he was anything else. And then he also wrote on magic and witchcraft, and he also wrote on heresy, and he also wrote on lay spirituality, and so forth and so on. And he's one of the main figures in here. But even before that book, my very first ever academic article was on the origins of the witches' Sabbath. It was on this little collection, this little cluster of sources, not quite the same as in this book because knowledge has changed over time. But basically, on this cluster of sources, so within the study of witchcraft, and within particularly the study of medieval witchcraft, and the bulk of witchcraft scholarship is really 16th and 17th century, the major witch hunts. It's really an early modern game. But within the story of medieval witchcraft, this idea of what a witch means, what a witch is, or what witchcraft would mean, meaning this very intensely diabolical, demonic, and also conspiratorial and cultish activity that witches don't just practice harmful magic and make you sick and wither your crops and things like that, but that they gather together in these groups and they summon up demons and they worship the demons and do horrible things at these what eventually comes to be called Sabbaths. This appears very, very late in the medieval period. That is, it appears in the early 15th century. And the first time it really makes its appearance as a recognizable concept is in this really tightly clustered set of sources. It's difficult to say linked. That's one of the great oddities about it. They're tightly clustered together, and there are some links you can discern between them, but it's not like oh, clearly one source led to the other, or they were all copying off each other or anything like that. Anyway, there are these cluster of sources, 4 or 5 of them, depending on how you count and how you define, all from basically Western Switzerland. Um, so really, one should say the Western Alps because they do get into what is a bit now France, what is a bit now Italy, so forth and so on. And Switzerland didn't exist at the time, so um, around the Western Alps, um, and they all in basically a single decade, all within the 1430s. And so, how I came to that, I knew I was already interested in witchcraft. How I came to that was, well, you're a grad student, you're looking for sort of a starter project before your big dissertation. I'm like, oh, here's a set of sources that has some definition and containment to it. So I looked at them all and wrote an article about this cluster of sources, and that was published in 1996. And then, damn their eyes, in 1999, this cadre of Swiss scholars, wonderful, wonderful historians, come out with this mammoth volume editing editing all of these sources. I had to actually work through them in various ways, and no, they just come out and explaining everything you ever want to know about them and giving all the background and making manuscript discoveries that I never could have possibly done. Uh, but okay, that was fine because at that point I was on to my dissertation on Johannes Nieder, which was really about his whole career and all the things he was interested in, and witchcraft was just a part of that. But in the back of my mind, I always thought, oh, that it would be useful to get these sources translated. They form this little set of sources, and experts know about them, but nobody else really does. I mean, the average person, if you ask them about witchcraft texts, you know, maybe they've heard of Malleus Maleficarum, which is late 15th century, which is 1486, and is influenced by these sources. So, just literally for 2 decades. As you say, as I wandered through these various paths and I sort of went from witchcraft to magic to superstition and so forth and so on, it was always in my mind to, at some point it would be nice to have this. Um, and then I guess what really triggered it is the press, Penn State University Press, developed this series, this source book series, this series of sources and translation that asks for not just one. They want more than just a single text. So they want it to be 2 or more texts, but reasonably lengthy. So not just dozens of snippets of different little things.
Mhm.
And I thought, well, that's if they're willing to go for 4 or 5, um, that would fit. That would be great. I could do this.
Perfect.
And then then I just kind of found the time, and I actually started doing this work before COVID, but I finished up right in COVID, and COVID contributed because I was sitting home going, I can't do anything else. I'll finish knocking this out.
Thanks, COVID.
Yeah, yeah. What a fad.
Ah,
Um,
all right. And
so yeah,
this
I don't
makes
know if
sense.
that's sort of well, that's really more sort of my personal context with him. That's not really contextualizing the sources so much.
We'll get there. I was interested in your personal journey, Professor Bailey, so that is exactly what I wanted. And we'll get to the sources in a minute. Well, actually, let's talk about them now. Like, okay, so you've got Hans. I'm going to pronounce his name poorly. Hans Freund.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, brilliant. Those Dutch lessons. See, that's why I'm learning Dutch, so I can say funny German names. Uh, reports on witchcraft in Valais, Claude Tolosan's treatise, in which you call also that the error of magicians and witches, but it is the first sentence, which is 100 words long or something, right?
Yeah, it's never been given a
Yeah.
understandable title.
So, Errors of the Ghazali by an unknown author, Anthill by Nieder, as already mentioned, and The Valderie of Lyon, also by an unknown author. So that's an interesting kind of collection. So I get that the choice was they were together. Do you pick these 5 out of dozens, hundreds? Like,
These are basically it. These define the major sources, non trial based sources, the sort of narrative sources, um,
okay,
from this
that's
one
a good.
decade in the 1430s.
That's a
Um,
pretty good cluster, though. Yeah.
it is. This is the mind boggling thing, and it's not like so. Nieder, to take them not in any sort of order, Nieder is a churchman and a theologian, Dominican theologian, a member of the Dominican Order of the Church. And so he's writing, he's sort of academically and intellectually interested in stuff of this ilk. The Vauderie of Lyon is anonymous author, but certainly written by Dominican inquisitors. So they're coming from somewhat the same angle. Um, Hans Freund is just a chronicler. He's basically a historian, and he has a report has come to him about big burning of witches over the last several years, in a region, the region of he's in Lucerne, and the region of Valais is a bit to the south of him, and so he's just recording that as this remarkable event I've heard. Claude Tolosan is a lawyer, and he and is a not a church lawyer. He is a secular lawyer. He's an official of the French crown in Dauphiné, in the southeast of France, there in the Alps, the French what would now be the French Alps. And he's interested in lawyers' questions. He's interested in he's interested in arguing that he gets to prosecute these people, not those damn church inquisitors. So yeah, they come from all sorts of different angles, and the thing that holds them together is they just happen to all be writing at around the same place, at around the same time. Um, what is going on is that the first sort of recognizable witch trials are really happening at this time and place. That is a witch trial. Maybe one might also almost say a witch hunt, in the sense that not just individual trials, but these bigger processes that involve forcing people to confess to being in groups, and then forcing them to implicate others is starting to rise in various jurisdictions, but all in this tightly clustered region.
Which, of course, kind of is your point. One of your arguments in battling demons, that the witch hunts. If I'm making air quotes, I do this a lot. I'm sorry. I'm making air quotes, which you cannot see. But if the witch hunt, if there's such a thing, that it's a medieval or a late medieval phenomenon in it, or it originates there.
Yeah, exactly. And so we need to figure out, what was in the water in this period that caused authorities, people with power, to look at a basic set of beliefs that they had always accepted. I mean, it's not that people suddenly thought magic was new that they hadn't believed in before. They had always believed that magic could exist. They'd always believed that people could work harm through magic. The medieval church had always taught for centuries and centuries that any type of harmful or illicit magic, what we say is harmful and illicit magic, is inevitably demonic. But nobody had this idea of, if we accuse you of doing that thing, then we're also going to accuse you of basically being a member of a heretical cult, of gathering together in big numbers, of worshiping demons, so forth and so on.
And the idea that it's demonic, and specifically, right? That this isn't just some kind of random practice.
Right, very much guided by the devil or demons. The sources go back and forth in that terminology. Really quite explicitly, demons literally teaching, the language of teaching and instructing, which is what they're supposed to do and how they're supposed to do it, is evident throughout all of these sources.
Oh, listen, if you're going to learn a thing, get a good tutor. It's very important.
Go to the source and get practical experience. Think of it as a summer internship, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
Learn how to wither crops, and then go out and wither some crops.
Absolutely, and you don't want to learn that from your next door neighbor, not when you've got the demon.
Exactly.
All right, so I'm guessing most of our audience has never read a medieval witchcraft treatise. So just, can you tell us can you describe them? What are they like, for lack of a better question?
Well, they can be a bit varied. They certainly, in this period, so by the time you get into by the time you reach, say, the Malleus Maleficarum, as I said, in the late 1400s, and then when you get into the 15 and 1600s, you get, I won't at all say a standard form, but you get sort of a witchcraft treatise. It's a book in which somebody sits down and says, okay, this is a thing now. This is a topic. People have written about it before. I'm going to write about it now. These early texts, these texts from the 1430s, they're just making it up as they go along. So, Hans Frunz is truly just a report. He says, this is a report on some things I've heard, and it's about 2 or 3 pages long. Claude Tolosans is really a legal treatise. He's one of the ones where I've actually, in this book, I only translate about the first third of his text, which is really sort of the narrative about what witches do and how horrible they are, and it's the shiny, interesting part. The other 2/3 is all legal justification. It is literally citing case law, and it is both unimaginably boring and unimaginably difficult to translate. I know, because I translated the whole damn thing before I decided I was only going to publish the first third of it, which was bad call on my part. The rest of it is very, very, very interesting, actually, if you're interested in legal history. But so what you get are the witchy parts of it, and the reason I've focused this all around the witch's Sabbath is to give these somewhat diverse sources a little bit of structure. So what holds them together is that they're all describing, in various ways, groups of witches meeting in some type of significant numbers in the presence of one or more demons. And so most of what they focus on is actually that. I was actually called on the carpet when I turned in the text of my own introduction, and one of the readers came back and said, you tell us all about the Sabbath, but you don't actually tell us what witchcraft is. Maybe you should go back and do that. So, if you think of actual witchcraft as the magical actions, the spells and the charms and the poisons and the evil eye, the baleful looks and things like that, that actually, make your child get a fever or make your cow stop giving milk or whatever. These treatises don't talk about that terribly much at all. They just kind of take that as an assumed, as a given. That's all in the background. What they usually kind of plunge right into is these incredibly lurid stories of these conventicles, of these gatherings, and it's the witches come together, they summon up a demon. Sometimes the demon is described, and when it is, that can be very exciting. The Vauderie of Lyon has the best, it's like half a page just describing what the demon looks like in great, great detail, literally head to toe, what the demon looks like. Um, and then sort of gleefully, almost pornographically recounting all the awful things witches do. They have sex with each other. They have sex with demons. They kill children. They eat the murdered babies. They eat the corpses. Um, and then what happens is they're given. Then having done all that, they're basically just given instructions to now go off and destroy the crops in that field. Now go off and cause fever and sickness in that town, in that village, and they go and do it. But that's actually kind of all off screen.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. So, so the audience, like lawyers, other church people, eventually like witchcraft, witch hunters, like with people who go prosecute witches. This is an audience. Is anyone else going to be reading these?
I wouldn't think so. I think all of these texts I'm working with are in one way or another intended for um, basically audiences similar to whoever it was writing them. Um, and
Yeah.
for the most part, what they're trying to do is make a justification for why they should get to prosecute these people and why it's so important that they be allowed sort of free reign. Um, Claude Tolosan, who I've already mentioned a couple times, is the most directly lawyerly, the most really arguing for, literally saying this is in my jurisdiction and not in that other legal jurisdiction to do. But really, what all of them, I would say, with the exception of Hans Freund, who is just kind of a historian reporting on this event, what all of the rest of them are really trying to do is to make an argument to other authorities like them, either in the church or in secular governments, both, that there are these people out there. Basically, the argument comes down to we have always known that there are probably people out there who perform harmful magic, who perform witchcraft in that most basic sense. What you need to know from me is that they are much more horrible than you ever imagined. They are more horrible. They are more organized. They are out to destroy society. Wow, a lot of this is suddenly ringing very presentive to me. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
Wow.
this is the first time because that's how clever I am about the material I work on. So what they're trying to do is say, this is the enemy. The enemy is much worse than you ever imagined. And so you need to do, or you need to let me do what I want to do, which is this much more ramped up, what becomes the witch hunts, this much more ramped up form of persecution and action against them. And sometimes that works, and sometimes, rather charmingly, it doesn't work. We happen to know. But I think that's what they're all trying to do.
I have this vision in my head of some Dominicans hanging around, like reading these things together, and it's very exciting.
The Dominicans, as I said, that there were sort of these traces of connections between them, and probably the Dominican order is the the clearest one. Not to say that it's incredibly clear, not to say that we have clear evidence of I read that guy's treatise and now I want to write my own. But three of these five texts that I translate here were all written by Dominicans. Johannes Nieder's Anthill, the anonymous heirs of the Ghazari and the equally anonymous votary of Lyon. But we think in both those anonymous cases it was no. I'm sorry. Votary of Lyon was definitely Dominican inquisitors, but the heirs of the Ghazari was best guess is probably a Franciscan inquisitor. So I've slightly slipped up there. But yeah, that is probably one level of transmission that within either just the Dominican order or at least the mendicant orders, or within inquisitorial networks within the church, there you can see there's a network. People might have read each other's works, might have been inspired a little bit by them. And yeah, the votary of Lyon, which is anonymous but almost certainly written by Dominicans in the Dominican convent of Lyon, we know fairly clearly there what their purpose was. They wanted to start an inquisition. Because that would make them inquisitors. And the local bishop was resisting, and the local townspeople were resisting. So that's a case where it seems pretty reasonably clear that they probably had access to, if not the absolute texts, at least to these ideas that are circulating through sort of, their atmosphere. And they said to themselves, "Well, this is great. Let's say there are witches here, and then we'll be empowered to do what we want." And it completely failed. Uh, the local bishop said, "Nope, don't believe you. Not going to let you do it." Sad.
Sorry.
Stymied. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, you wouldn't want if you could keep from having a bunch of Dominicans running around your territory, you would, wouldn't you? I mean,
If you're not one of those Dominicans, you would.
yeah, if you're not, it's like obviously, if you're a Dominican, you're going to be like, we must have an inquisition, and we're good at it. But yeah, I mean that follows, right? And it kind of leads to the question I was going to ask a bit later, but let's go to it now, which is like, what can we learn by reading them? And I think, like what am I learning from this discussion and from reading these texts, as well as aside from them just being cool, if you're us, but like if you're cool like us, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I think you can learn how ideas get started. An idea that this is one of those examples in history where you can say the idea is so clearly outlandish, so clearly nuts, frankly, um, that there couldn't be. It can't be that oh, maybe there was some reality to it and they switched this and that around and so forth and so on. The reality was almost certainly, yeah, there are people around in villages and in towns in the late Middle Ages who are working magic of various kinds, and there are probably people who are worried that their neighbors are sort of out to get them through magical means. But these stories are so nuts. And I don't mean that in an anachronistic, looking back from a modern perspective, we think they're nuts way. I mean, these people writing down these texts say things like, "You're going to think I'm crazy for telling you this, but you really, really have to believe me. You'll be shocked and appalled by what I'm about to tell you. That's the whole point of it. But you have to believe me." And so this is actually something I've thought about. I haven't been completely divorced from the present day. I think one of the things this can show is how outlandish conspiracy theories can take root. How sort of this is the notion that we certainly know of from the modern period. How the big lie can be more effective than the small one. You win people over precisely by being so over the top. You don't go in gradual steps. And one of the things it shows me is um, the power of elites and the importance of whether elites take up an idea or not. Because as I said, all of the authors I'm working with, they're not sort of writing popular propaganda. They're really writing for other elites, and they say at points quite clearly, you don't believe this yet. This isn't what the normal, educated, intelligent, sophisticated person of the late Middle Ages, churchman or laity, would believe, but you have to believe this new thing. And eventually, for a variety of reasons, and that becomes sort of stuff I've explored in all the rest of my career. Because there are these tendencies toward church reform that this can lead into, because there are growing legal structures that it can lead into and be used to support. You see over the course of time how from this kernel, other elites latch onto this idea for their own purposes, and 50 or 100 years later, I mean, more or less, there's this idea across Western Europe, always debated, always contested. There were always people who said valiantly, it's ridiculous. I've never believed it all along. But there's this idea all across Western Europe of this is what witches are. There are these cults of witches. They are all servants of the devil. They're meeting together at these Sabbaths. We've got to hunt them out, and it all starts here.
I think we let's put the finest of points on this. Like what you go to a witch for. There are people practicing witchcraft. We know that. You don't have to believe in witchcraft. That we know that people are practicing witchcraft. But what they're doing is really pretty benign. Or they're getting blamed for things like the crops dying or like a kid being sick or it's very localized. You go to them for love spells. You go to them if you can't get pregnant. Like there are all these reasons, right? And then and we've got this, and then 50, 100 years later, there is a panic, a verifiable panic, and everyone understands that there's a demonic practice and that it must be stamped out and completely removed from society because it's endangering all of us.
Yeah. There's a charming little passage in one of my texts. Claude Tolosson, the secular judge, the official of the French royal government, he's operating out of this little town called Briançon, which is just outside of Grenoble in what is now the French Alps. Well, it was then too. It had just become part of the French kingdom. And by the time he comes to write his treatise, he tells us at least that he's been prosecuting witches for several years. He's prosecuted a couple hundred at that point. And he says, before I started, he says before we, my crew, started this important legal work, the people here, they went to these witches for healing and to talk to the dead, basically seances, talk to their dead relatives. And these foolish people had no idea that they were actually, implicating themselves in this demonic network. They were just trying to do these relatively banal, generally helpful sort of social functions. And yeah, that's absolutely what the witches almost certainly were. The ones who weren't just completely accused absolutely randomly. They were your local. The term is cunning person, but your local magic user, your local healer, the woman who read your palm and told you who you were going to marry, the person you went to, as you said, for I don't want to marry that person. I want to marry the other person. Give me a love spell so that they can fall in love with me. And we know that sort of at a general level, then as the opposite of that, there's always a suspicion that these people could be doing more harmful things. It's just sort of the natural opposite. If that person can heal, doesn't it make sense that they could also work harm? And maybe they are working harm against me in some circumstances. But yeah, it's this very, very local sort of interactions between neighbors, village interactions sort of thing. And then there comes this cosmological, universal scheme. No, it's all this literally satanic plot against Christian society. And that is an idea. That is an idea that takes hold for the next at least couple hundred years. I will say one of the things we see all throughout the 16th and the 17th century, all throughout the major witch hunts across Europe, is there remain plenty of people who say I I either don't believe that that level of threat exists, or I just don't care about it. What I care about is there's this person down the street from me who can either help me out or maybe hurt me a little bit through this magic that we all kind of believe in. Um, so at least it doesn't grip every single mind in the world. But as we've seen, it doesn't have to grip every mind. It just has to grip a few influential ones.
Right. Yeah, suddenly becomes this very pressing situation. I hadn't expected to kind of get to have my daily dose of existential dread. But thanks.
Um,
Um,
it all ends. It all turns out okay in the end.
yeah,
There's
just
that.
that's great. Yeah,
It
just a
takes
couple hundred.
200 years. That's the thing that concerns me. That once an idea gets rooted, once it succeeds in getting rooted, it can take a long time to
Mm-hmm.
completely root it out again. But it can happen.
Sure. All right. I'd like to step back to more cheery topics, which is your fabulous talent as a scholar. What language are these in?
They are all in Latin, save for Hans Frunz, which is in German. Sort of the late medieval German gobbledygook.
Mhm.
That
Okay.
that was by far the hardest for me.
Yeah, I can. Oh, yeah, they're terrible. I mean, because medieval Latin is no joy, but it's still at least something that everyone has in common.
Yeah.
Which also speaks to the idea of who these are for. That tells us a lot about who's supposed to be reading these. And
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Again, these are all written, for educated people who would be able to read Latin.
right on. So have you put these guys to bed? Have you put these sources to bed? Are you done with them, or is this going to be some new? Is this part of another project?
I think I think they're largely to bed for the moment. I do have the other two-thirds, the legalistic side of that one treatise, Claude Toloson's treatise that I mentioned, that I've translated, and it's interesting and important. It actually is a very important document in terms of the legal history of witchcraft. So at some point, you know I will probably look to put that out in some form or another. Um, but yeah, I think for the time being, I put these to bed. I seem to always come back to Johannes Nieder, and his source, the anthill, is enormous. That was another one I had to excerpt just for size. It's just an enormous text. And I've kind of always had in the back of my mind, it'd be nice to have a translation out there that people could use of that. But that would be its own freestanding book. So for the moment, yeah, I've shelved these. I've got different things on my agenda.
Which are what are you working on right now?
Well,
Mm.
what I am working on right now is actually magic and witchcraft. You'll be shocked to hear. Um, I tried valiantly to get away a little bit. Um, and I had this idea after the big superstition book, Fearful Spirits. I had this idea that I would sort of really ambitious idea that I will draw together everything that I do in the most general sense possible. And I decided the framework for that was incorrect forms of religion. So superstition, but also heresy, but also church reform. Because within church reform movements, the reformers get very vociferous about saying to their enemies, what you are doing is very wrong religion. And I puttered around with that for a while, and it was gigantic and huge, and it was clearly too big. Um, so I ran screaming away from that. And what I have now, though, is an idea I'm very excited about, which is to write a history of magic in the Middle Ages across the whole of the Middle Ages. So we're talking from the 500s to the 1500s,
Okay. All
with a
right.
with a focus on doubt and skepticism, on not believing. And so the big framework here is when one thinks about the medieval period, or really, frankly, the pre-modern, the real framework here is pre-modern versus modern. When one thinks about the pre-modern, one of the things that defines it is that's when they believed in magic. And the modern is when we don't believe in magic anymore, when we have become disenchanted. And there's been a bunch of great work in the past, really 2 decades. While I've been tinkering away on the Middle Ages, there's been a bunch of great work by modern historians and anthropologists about how that, needless to say, is all bunk. It's not all bunk. Obviously, we believe modern society believes in magic a lot less than earlier societies. But it's not like magic has vanished. It's not like there are not magical elements in all sorts of ways through all sorts of different modern societies. So you take that notion that, in fact, the modern isn't really completely 100% disenchanted and disbelieving and skeptical. And I want to look back at the Middle Ages and point out, frankly, something that every expert will know in their own little niche, that all throughout the Middle Ages, there were people who didn't believe in various types of magic and various aspects of magic. For example, in the story we've just been talking about here, part of the story of witchcraft is a story of people not believing in this thing, and a certain cadre of authorities and a certain cadre of writers coming along and working very hard, really, to say, no, you have to believe this. You may believe in other types of magic and in other ways that magic operates in the world, but you haven't believed in this way, and now you need to. Now you need to take it seriously. And that just becomes a thread. There is no point in the history of magic. There is no aspect of magic about which there was not some contestation. Some people saying this is absolutely what it is. It's terribly real. We have to take it terribly seriously, and other people saying not at all, not in the least, just at different levels. So the idea is to trace that all out, in sort of in a way present a another history of medieval magic, but from this angle, that I think will most importantly set the medieval period in a little bit of different perspective toward the modern period. Not so much that they were strange and distant and other. They were in a lot of ways. Everybody is. You're strange and distant and other to me. But they weren't as strange and as distant and as other as all that. They were both like us, as well as being very much not like us, which is banal because that's true of any period in history. But the emphasis within magic has been so much that the medieval is the period of belief, of sort of blind belief, overflowing credulity in everything, simplistic credulity in everything magical, and I want to undermine that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, obviously they're both like and dislike, and unlike us is a standard thing across time, but there's very few things like people believing in magic that we have so much stake in separating our modern selves from.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it has been one of the defining hallmark features of modernity, both to its own past. We are so much better than the medieval. It's one of the reasons why the term medieval is thrown around as a derogatory term. If you call someone medieval, you're not usually not complimenting them.
Rarely a
It's also
compliment.
been employed around the globe. This is how advanced Western scientific cultures degrade, you know, local, more traditional cultures because they still believe in magic. So we have to modernize them. We have to correct their strange and silly superstitions and so forth. Um,
No, yeah, of course.
and then there's
Just
this to get all academic again. There's this interesting little twist as well within the academic study of medieval magic. Although everybody knows that, of course, there's this example of skepticism, there's that example of skepticism, whatever. Another thing I want to correct is I think there has been an overemphasis among academic studies on medieval credulity, precisely because we, as modern progressive academics, don't want to be perceived as sort of imposing this framework of we know it was all false. but we don't want to denigrate them for any of their beliefs, so we just kind of won't question their beliefs at all. Even when they, in various ways, through various sources, say, I don't believe in this part of it, at least, either. So I think that'll be a very interesting contribution to, the grand conversation.
Excellent. Oh, God, that's really cool. I'm excited. I'm very curious about this Doubt Project. I will say I'm a little disappointed. You're Doing It Wrong would have been a great title, and I'm so
You know,
sorry.
the problem is when you start a project with a great title, and then you got to work out the project. It's
Sure.
better to go the other way around, I have found.
Yeah, fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, as a rule, probably not, everything. At least trying to write a book about, all the things is maybe not
That
a
would be a
wide.
great title too. All the things.
Yeah, that's I think that's not what we call the internet. All the things, or
Oh
you're doing it
God,
wrong.
yeah, that's exactly what it would be.
Yeah. Oh God. All right. I have taken up so much of your time, but it has been a delight to speak to you, um, my old friend and incredibly brilliant historian, Michael Bailey.
Well, thank you very much. It's been delightful to talk to you as well.
Wonderful. All right. And I'll be in touch when you write that doubt book. We'll talk about that one.
Great, thank you.
All right. Bye bye.